Well, I have been blessed to live on the world now for almost a decade. And I have been blessed to meet some of the billionaires and some of the very centimillionaires that are on there. And there's definitely certain traits that they have. And it's interesting, there's a roundtable discussion that meets 7:30 in the morning. And most of the guys get together. It's the roundtable guys. And they are talking about wealth. They're talking about finance. They're talking about economics, world issues. They're literally, that's their focus. They have a high value on mastering wealth. And the people that don't have a value on wealth, they don't show up. It's very, very straightforward. And what I've learned from them is that the more you study, the more you learn, the more you mentor, the more you focus, the more you value wealth, the more it becomes part of your life. Recently in Antarctica, when I was on the world in Antarctica, one of the roundtable discussions, we were talking about the financial tax structures that people were facing. It became a discussion about how they structured their taxes around the world. And of course, different countries have different tax laws, but they came from different countries. So I was just listening in and learning about when they come from Europe and Norway, or they come from London, or they come from the US or Canada, or where they come from Brazil, or they come from Mexico. I was listening to the different tax strategies that they had on how they master their money around the world, because most of them have money not in just one country, but literally in different countries around the world. And they're literally fluctuating with the currencies, how they master their wealth. And so, yeah, I was learning about what they did with their wealth in different countries relative to their taxes, and the challenges that they face, keeping their taxes not exuberant, because sometimes when you have billions of dollars, you have to pay billions in taxes. And so what they do to reduce the taxes and the legitimate structures and the tax accountants and attorneys that they have to have, and the way they structure these things. So it's sometimes very complex. Just as much energy spent in building wealth sometimes can be the same amount of energy maintaining the wealth and preserving the wealth. And it was very evident listening to these billionaires talk about this. The thing that I'm amazed at is some people live in a fantasy that when you're a billionaire, then life is easy. But it really grounds you to realize the challenges that they face. Because they're in the limelight as billionaires, many times governments are targeting them, and governments are watching them. And they're making sure that they're in a city or a state or a nation so many days out of the year to make sure that they follow the tax guidelines, etc. So they've got all these restraints on them that the average person doesn't even think about, making sure that they're in a country or in a state a certain number of days so those tax rules will apply, or otherwise they got to restructure their whole finances. So what I learned is what those constraints are and what I might be able to do to live within those constraints and still live the life I dreamed, and to be able to maximize my tax advantages, and to make sure that I build the wealth that I want, and make sure that I don't get it eroded by unnecessary taxes just because I'm not thinking those things through. The more wealth that you accumulate, the more accountabilities will come with it. And with that, if you're not willing to study those and learn those, just like you are learning how to save money and invest money initially, that you'll probably live in a fantasy about having vast fortunes. There are certain principles that have stood the test of time with wealth building. And the great classics of wealth building, if you know them, you have an advantage. And there is no doubt in my mind that you can be a prophet of your financial destiny if you incorporate them into your life. And so many people who have really studied wealth have come to the realization of this. When I think of those, I think of some individuals like the textbook Family Wealth by James E. Hughes. Here's a gentleman who has summarized some of the wealthiest individuals and some of the strategies they've used. And if a person applies those strategies, they'll set up not only wealth for themselves, but their families and the generations in the future. So yes, there are certain, I guess you could say, strategies that have stood the test of time, and if you follow them, you'll get the same results.